Excellent. So yeah, now we're recording. All right. Okay, so when we borrow money and we make regular payments back, we call this an installment loan. So we looked at borrowing money a little bit like with simple interest, right? You can say, okay, I'm going to borrow, $200. I'll pay you back, next month or something like that. All right, that's one thing. But when we make a large purchase and we're borrowing money from a bank, we usually do something called an installment loan. And an installment loan, you borrow a big lump sum and then you pay it back with regular payments. Almost always those are going to be monthly payments. They don't have to be, though. Okay, so the idea is that every month we get charged interest on how much we owe, and then we make a payment on how much we owe. And the payment is more than the interest, so that the amount we owe goes down, and the loan's over when the amount you owe is zero, right? Makes sense. Okay. The good news is a lot of the same symbols that we've used in the last few sections, we keep, right? So we're going to have a percentage rate R, okay? Number of payments per year, N. That's going to work just like we had from compound interest. So if we have monthly payments, N is 12. Okay, the amount we borrow is going to be the principal, P. The number of years is T, okay? And now we're going to be looking at monthly payments as being this PMT thing. Similar to when we were talking about saving money and we were making deposits, okay, we're going to use the same PMT variable, okay? So here's our installment loan formula. I only have one formula here instead of, two or more, and this is only solved for the monthly payments, right? So the idea is if I want to buy something like a house or a car or a couch and I need to finance it and I borrow money, what I want to do is say, okay, I'm going to pay it back in this many years, and with this interest rate, how big do my payments have to be? Okay, so typically wanting to know what the monthly payment is going to be the main thing. So that's what we're solving for. Okay, and again, we can use the finance solver on our calculator the same way, right? Hit the app button, right? Fill in what we have, and then hit solve on what we're looking for, which in this case is always going to be the payment. Okay, so let's look at an example. Suppose we borrow $15,000 for a new car. Okay, so if the amount I want to borrow is $15,000, then P equals 15,000. And the dealer will give you 5% interest, so our interest rate is 0.05. Okay, for 5 years, so T is 5 years. Okay. Find the monthly payment for the loan. So we want to find the payment. And since it says monthly payment, that lets me know that N is 12. Okay. So what we can do is I'm going to go through this two different ways. I'm going to use the formula. So PMT equals, okay. And we go back and look at our formula, and it's this, big complicated thing. So you want to make sure that you have this handy when you're, writing things down, okay. You don't want to try and memorize these formulas. That's not really helpful for you in life anyway. Okay. Okay, so we have P R over N numerator, and then the denominator we want to put in parentheses, 1 minus, parentheses, 1 plus, over N, negative NT. Okay, I think I got that all right. So I'm going to put all of this into my calculator. We're going to bring my calculator up on the screen. There it is. I want to show up. Oh, it's here. Okay, so let's enter this in on our calculator, right? So I have 15,000 times parentheses 0.05 divided by 12. And the denominator, I start with a parentheses, 1 minus parentheses 1 plus 0.05 divided by 12 to the power of, and make sure you don't forget the negative, 12 times 5. And then close the parenthesis for the denominator. Okay, so we get 283.07, and as usual, I'm going to just round everything to the nearest cent. Okay, so that's using the formula. Remember, we can also use this finance app, which I'm perfectly happy to use for everything. It makes all of your computations a lot easier, especially when you're mixing problems together. Okay, so the amount that we're borrowing is the PV here, 15,000. I don't know the payments, I'll skip over that. Final value is 0. The loan's over when I owe 0. Okay, and because this is monthly, I want the payments per year to be 12 and compounds per year to be 12. So I go back up to the payment and hit solve, and I get my 283.07. And again, ignore the negatives that you get on here. That's just an accounting thing that they do. Okay. So that's the monthly payment on the loan. Okay. So let's look at another option, or another example. Suppose I want to buy a car for $29,500. That looks like the price of a car to me, because it's never, when you're buying a car, they never make it like an even thousand. And actually, there's like psychology reasons for that. If they make the significant digit in the hundreds, if you're going to negotiate, then your attention's focused on the hundreds, and maybe you're a little bit more likely to want to negotiate by hundreds. And in thousands, you want to negotiate by thousands. So here I'd say knock $2,000 off. Here, my brain might say knock $200 off, right? Okay. Also, maybe it makes it seem less arbitrary. I don't know. There's different reasons. Okay. The dealership has a special running. You can either get 0 down, 0 interest for 60 months, or you can get $3,000 cash back and 6% financing. Okay. And again, these are, I think, hopefully typical. I mean, car specials are all different, but this is something that I've seen on many occasions. So this should be something that you might typically run into. And we decide that if we were going to choose the cash back option, instead of going out and buying a new refrigerator or something, we would use the cash towards the car. Okay, and that way we can try to make an even comparison here between these two options. So what we want to do is completely compare the two options. So on the left, I'll have option A, and on the right, I'll have option B. Okay. Now, with option A, if it's 0 interest, okay, then I don't need a formula to decide how much I'm going to pay, because there's no compounding. It's just no interest. So I'm just going to say, how many total payments are there, right? There's 60 months, so it's 60 payments. I just take the amount that I borrowed and divide by 60. Okay, so here my payment is going to be 29,500 divided by 60. Okay, so I get $491.67. Oops, 5%. So that's my monthly payments. Okay, and what would be the total cost of the car? Well, if I pay nothing down and no interest, then I'll just have paid the regular amount. Okay, so the total cost is 29,500. Okay. All right, so that's very easy. If there was no interest, guess what? Financial math would be really easy. Okay. All right, option B, here we're using the financing and stuff. Okay, So here, we're going to get $3,000 cash back. We're going to use that money towards the car. So the amount that I'm borrowing isn't going to be $29,500 because I'm getting my $3,000 cash back. Okay, so I take my $29,500 and subtract the $3,000. So I only have to borrow $26,500. So that's what I'm going to be making payments on. Okay, and the interest rate is 6%. Okay, for 60 months. And what I'm going to do is for this one, I'm just going to throw that in here, right? This is already 60 months, right? So that's fine. Interest rate is 6%. We borrowed $26,500. And so now we compute our payment, right? The FV and the P over Y is all set already. Okay. So here I see that I have payments of $512.32. Okay. So then the total cost is going to be that $512.32 that I made 12 times. Well, we can just say for 60 months, right? So if we were told how many years, I would take 12 times my years. How do I get to that on my calculator? So from your home screen, you hit the apps button. The first thing on there should be finance. You hit enter, and then TVM solver, and you hit enter. Okay, so if I take 512.32 times 60, I get $30,739.20. Okay, so we end up paying a little bit more if we use option B in this case. If we got a better interest rate than 6%, maybe option B would be cheaper because they give us that free 3,000, right? So if instead of a 6% rate, if they gave us a 4% rate, right, 488.04, okay, then we would be paying slightly less than option A. Okay, so it's definitely details to consider. It's not always going to be this one's better or this one's better. Okay, what I wanted to show though was the two steps here. Finding the monthly payment, we use the formula or our calculator. And then if I want to find the total cost, I take my payments, multiply it by how many payments I made. Okay. We would also, to find the total cost, add in any down payment that we made. But in this example, we didn't bring in any money for a down payment. In this option B, we're using the free cash back they gave us as a down payment. So that's not coming out of our pocket. So we don't need to include that. Okay. Now let's look at creating a payment schedule. Okay. We did something like this when we were computing compound interest, right? When we said, all right, what does compound interest look like month by month? This is kind of the same thing, okay? So this is called a payment schedule. This is also sometimes called an amortization schedule if it's for a house, okay? I'll list that later. When we get to houses, there's lots of extra terminology that I have written down. So I'll introduce that later. But right now, let's just look at this payment schedule. So when we take out a loan, we can create this loan schedule to see how much we owe at the end of each month, how much we're paying, and how much that goes towards interest and how much actually pays down our loan. Okay, so let's suppose we're borrowing $30,000 at 6% interest, and we want to pay off the loan in 6 years, okay, using monthly payments. Okay, so our principal is $30,000. The rate is 0.06. Okay. It's in 6 years, so T is 6. Monthly payments, so N is 12. Okay. So if I use my payment formula, Okay. So again, if you have that finance app on your calculator, I think that that's better than using the formula directly, because you're less likely to make like a parenthesis or typo error. But go ahead and write this out. Oh, I can hear somebody singing. All right. So we get a monthly payment of $497, and if I round to the nearest cent, it'll be 19 cents. Okay. And again, if I were to use my finance app, the big N, remember, is little n times t. Okay, so 12 times 6. The interest rate, remember to leave it as a percentage, don't convert it to a decimal. Okay, so we have to be a little bit careful about some of those things in here. And then I should get the exact same number. Okay, so this is what we're going to keep. And now let's go down and let's look at our loan balance. Okay, so if I wanted to compute this payment schedule, okay, I borrowed $30,000, so after 1 month, I have to apply the interest. Interest rates are given as an annual rate. So if we're looking at monthly, so the monthly interest is going to be 0.06 divided by 12. Okay, and that comes out to a whole number, so we could write that out. But typically, when I'm dealing with this, I want to leave it as a fraction when I enter it in my calculator, so that if I had something like 0.3 repeating or something like that, that it keeps all the decimals for me and I don't have any rounding error. Okay, so for the first month, the amount of interest that we get, I'm going to take my $30,000 and multiply it by 0.06 divided by 12. So I have $150 in interest. So when I make a payment, $150 of that goes to pay off the interest. Okay. Since I paid $497.19, $150 goes to interest. The rest goes to my principal to pay off how much I owe. So I'm going to take my $497.19 and subtract 150. Okay, so that $347.19 goes to my principal. Okay, so that means that my loan balance will go down by $347.19. Okay, so then I'll end up with $29,652.81. Okay. So this one was $497.19 minus 150. And this one was 30,000 minus the 347.19. Okay. Now when we go to month 2, I'm going to start with my last month's loan balance and apply the interest to that. Okay. So we take this $29,652.81 and multiply it by 0.06 divided by 12. That was our monthly interest rate. So here I'm paying slightly less in interest, $148.26. Okay. So I'm making the same monthly payment each month, right? We're making this $497.19 monthly payment. But now there's slightly less interest to pay off. So I'm actually paying off slightly more of my loan, $348.93. Okay. So then my loan balance, I'm going to take my previous loan balance, $29,652.81, and subtract the amount of principal that I'm paying off this month, the $348.93. So we get $29,303.88. Okay. And just to make sure that we all got it, right, we'll do one last one. So my interest payment, I take this last month's previous balance and multiply it by 0.06 divided by 12. So we get 146.52 rounded to the nearest cent. Okay. And then again, we take the monthly payment is the only thing that does not change ever, right? It's the same for each month. So I take that monthly payment, subtract how much of it went towards interest, and then the remainder goes towards my principal, $350.67. So then we take our previous month's balance and subtract how much we paid off, and we get our new balance. So the initial 150 that was our $30,000 times the interest rate, 0.06 divided by 12, because that's our monthly interest rate. Okay. All right, and for the second one, it's the same thing, except we don't use 30,000 anymore. We use the previous loan's balance. Okay. So then our last balance is $28,953.21. Okay. And you could fill that out for the full loan, and then at the end, you'll get a loan balance of 0. Now, if I actually filled this out, like I made a spreadsheet or something and filled the whole thing out, the way that we did it, you might not get exactly 0 at the end. You might get maybe 2 cents or -3 cents or something like that because of rounding error. And one of the things that a loan contract will do is usually they specify what happens for that last month. But it's what makes sense, right? You pay off the amount that you need to pay off the whole thing. Okay. You don't pay any extra. So if because of the monthly payment, the last payment would make me go to -$12, you don't pay that extra $12. Your last monthly payment is just $12 less. Okay. All right. So this is the idea of making a payment schedule. Now, when you borrow money, it doesn't really matter what you borrow the money for, right? It works the same. So whether I'm buying a refrigerator or a house or a car, if I'm financing it, this is how loans work. However, houses have a lot of extra stuff to them. So one of the things I want to do is just quickly go over some of the terminology that you run into with buying a house. Now, some of this you'll find, with everything, right? Like a down payment, that's the money that you use at the beginning. You have that for other things too, right? Like a car or whatever. But when you're buying, if you're buying something like a refrigerator at Home Depot or something like that, and you say, okay, I'm gonna do the financing option or something like that, you're not going to run into things like closing costs. When you buy a house, you have things like closing costs, okay? And closing costs go to pay things like the realtor fees and the lawyer fees and the title company. Sometimes the bank will charge you a fee for creating a loan because they have to do all the paperwork. Okay, so closing costs refer to all of the fees and the buyer, the buyer pays when they buy the house. Okay, points are not something that you will always have. Okay, it's something that you can have sometimes. So the idea of points is these are percentage points of the amount of money that you borrow, right? So if we say like 3 points, it's 3% of the money that you're borrowing. Okay, and the idea is that sometimes the bank will give you the option to pay points, so you're paying extra money ahead of time to get a better interest rate. Okay, and we'll look at an example of that later on. Okay, earnest money is like a deposit that holds the house for you. So like if you say, okay, I'm going to buy this house, you say, all right, we're going to sign a contract, and when we sign a contract, you have to pay a little bit now so that they can feel confident taking the house off the market while they, figure out the deal. Okay. So usually when you buy a house, you don't walk away with the keys of the house, that day. You're going to do a closing later. Earnest money sort of holds the house for you. Okay. Amortization is like what we just did. That's the repayment schedule. We only call it an amortization though when we're buying a house, because for a house we call it a mortgage. It's kind of the same as, any other loan, but houses there's so much more details to them. They get some of their own special words. Okay. Escrow is something interesting that's a little bit separate from everything, from sort of the loan itself. Okay. So an escrow is there's a number of different ways where you can use something in escrow. So the definition, right? This is a financial agreement where a third party holds and regulates payments of funds for two parties to complete a transaction. Okay, so for example, if I'm buying a house, but in order to buy the house, I have to sell my house and use some of that money towards buying the new house. Okay, the way that you might arrange that is you say, okay, the sale of the house isn't going to go into my checking account. The sale of my house is going to go into an escrow account that will then be used to buy the other house. Okay, so that way people can feel confident that no funny business is going to occur. Okay, because some other third party is going to hold the money. Okay, there's another way that escrow is used. When you go to buy a house, the bank is going to loan you money. The bank wants to make sure that their loan is secure. Okay, so when I buy a house, if I don't pay the taxes on my house, then the county or state or whoever can come by and say you haven't paid the taxes and take your house away. Now, they don't take your house away right away, but the point is that you can lose your house if you never pay your taxes. The bank gave you a bunch of money for this house, and if you lose the house, then they're going to lose their investment. So the bank is interested in keeping the house safe. Also, if your house burns down, the bank has lost their investment. So they want to make sure it's insured. So oftentimes the bank will say you have to have your taxes paid and you have to have homeowners insurance. And in order to make sure that you don't mess up and not pay those, the bank says, we will pay those, but we're going to pay it using your money. Okay. So oftentimes what happens is you will have what's called an escrow account that you have to put money into. That's going to be part of your monthly payment that at the, once a year, the bank will use to pay your taxes and to pay your insurance. Okay. So we'll look at an example that includes that. All right, a couple more things. And again, these are things that you're not going to see a lot of in your homework questions, but I think that it's probably very helpful to have talked about. FHA loan is a special type of loan that you can get if you're having trouble qualifying for a loan, right? So these are loans insured by the Federal Housing Administration, abbreviated FHA. Okay, so what happens is if I have bad credit, or maybe I've never bought something big before, I don't have very good credit, or bad credit score or something like that, I can apply for an FHA loan, and the federal government will help secure my loan. They're not really giving me money. What they're doing is they're giving the bank some security that the loan will be secured. so that the bank can give me like a reasonable rate. If a bank thinks I'm very risky, they're either going to charge me a lot of interest or just not loan to me at all. So this helps people get loans at a more reasonable rate. A similar thing is a VA loan if you're a veteran or if you're married to a veteran, or you can get loans through the Veterans Affairs Department, and they give you nice deals. Okay, this last thing is something I think that's going to be important to talk about. PMI, private mortgage insurance. When a bank loans you money for a house, okay, if you don't pay for that house, they can take it away from you, okay? They kick you out, they take the house, and they sell it to try and recover the money for their loan, okay? The problem with that process is if the house costs $300,000, for example, okay? Let's suppose you don't put any money down. You just walk in and you never make a payment. And they say, okay, we're gonna have to evict you and foreclose on the house. Foreclosure is when they take the house away from you. Okay. There's money involved in that process for them. And they might have to pay some money to fix things up and to resell it and stuff like that. So they're not going to get their full $300,000 back. Okay. And take a hit on that. And so what they do is they say, okay, if you made a down payment, suppose you paid 20% of the cost of the house, then it's a $300,000 house, but they didn't lend you a full $300,000, right? Okay. If they only lent you 80% of that, maybe they only lent you $240,000. Okay. Then when they take it away from you and they go to resell it, they can still recover their full $240,000, right? So if they've incurred other costs, they can still cover that. They don't give you back your down payment when they foreclose on you. But if I didn't make a big down payment, if I made a small down payment or no down payment, then they're a little bit at risk. So they might say, we need, in order to give you the loan, we need to have insurance. And they make you pay for that insurance. Now, all sales are different, so this isn't like an always thing, but this is very common. If you make less than 20% of your down payment, of the cost as a down payment, the bank will make you pay this, okay? Okay. So the bank makes you pay this. This does not help you ever. You never benefit from private mortgage insurance. If the house gets foreclosed on, the insurance is for the bank, not for you. Okay. The other thing that you need to be aware of for this, once you have paid off 20% of the value of your home, so I've been making payments for a few years or whatever, maybe now I've paid it down, I can stop paying my private mortgage insurance, okay? But I have to know to do that. Like I have to fill out a paperwork to do that. It's not always automatic, okay? So this is something very important to keep in mind if you're buying a house. If you're paying less than 20%, this is an extra cost that you're probably going to be charged. And you can stop paying for it. You don't have to pay for this the whole 30 years, okay? But you have to be aware of it to stop paying it. Okay. All right. Let's look at an example of buying a house. We want to buy a house. The house costs $200,000. Okay. We've saved up $15,000 for a down payment. Okay. The bank will finance the rest at 4%, 4.6%. They're going to give us a 30-year loan, and we're going to have $4,500 in closing costs. Okay. So I have $15,000. I'm going to have to pay $4,500 for closing costs. So my down payment is going to be $15,000 minus the closing costs. Okay. So even though I've saved up $15,000, only $10,500 is actually going towards the house. So then the amount that I have to finance is the cost of the house minus the amount that I have for a down payment. So I have to borrow $189,500 for this house. Okay. So in real life, I would have to pay private mortgage insurance. I'd have to pay PMI for this, but we're not gonna include, we're not gonna look at that in this example. Okay, so when I go to do my computations, I'm not using the $200,000. I'm using $189,500. Okay, so you have to be very careful, when you're going through these examples, one step at a time, write stuff down. Okay, so this is going to be our principal P. Okay. All right, we have our interest rate, 4.6%. It's a 30-year loan, so T is 30. Okay. It doesn't say specifically in the problem, well, I think until we get to here, that they're monthly payments. Okay. But unless it says otherwise, we can usually assume that payments are going to be monthly. Okay. All right. So for this first part, the amount of money that we have to borrow from the bank is $189,500. Okay. So then if I want to compute my monthly mortgage payment, again, we can either use the formula, and I'll just write this down one last time, but I'm not even going to punch it into my calculator. What I'm going to do is just use the finance solver. Okay, so it's 12, n is 12 times 30, right? Little n times t, right? Or the total number of payments that I have to make. The interest rate is 4.6%. The amount of money that I'm borrowing is $189,500. And then I'm going to solve, right? The payments is 12 and the ending value of my loan is 0. So my monthly payment is going to be $971.46. Okay. For our purposes, we're just going to always round to the nearest cent, and that's the easy way to do things. If I were actually borrowing money from a bank, they would always round up. They would say that this is $971.47. That way I can be sure that my very last payment isn't larger than usual, it's smaller than usual, or I don't have an extra month where I have like a few dollars left. Okay. If they round up, then I'll have paid it off in exactly the right amount of time, and my last payment will be smaller than it has to be. Okay. I don't want to get into too much hassle with rounding. So since in the past we've said round to the nearest cent, I'm going to say just always round to the nearest cent. That way we don't have different rules for different things. Okay, I don't think the 1 penny is going to make a big difference either way. Now I forgot the nearest cent. 46. Okay, so this is my monthly mortgage payment. Okay, now what we're going to do is find the total cost of the house. Okay, to find the total cost, what we need to do is look at our payments and compute those, but also look at what's the money that we paid at the beginning. Okay, so first let's look at our payments. So we have this 971.46, 12 times a year for 30 years. Okay, so that comes out to $349,725.60. Okay, our down payment if I look back, was $10,500, and our fees that we had to pay was $4,500. Okay, so if I add up these three numbers to get my total cost, I get $364,725.60. Okay, so it's something to keep in mind. Remember, when we were saving money, we said, hey, if you're saving for a really long time, like for your retirement, that interest is going to be really beneficial. It adds up for a long time. That's really good. It goes the other direction. When you're borrowing money for a long time, you end up paying a lot in interest. Okay, so 4.6% is a pretty decent interest rate, right? Interest rates are low right now, so that's reasonable. Okay, so for a $200,000 house, we end up paying, $364,000, right? Okay. So, when interest rates were worse, right, you end up paying for your house twice, right? So that's just how it goes. If you want to get your house cheaper, the answer is to be richer and have all the money right away. It's expensive to be poor, right? Okay. Let's look at another example. Suppose you want to buy a house and we have to mortgage $250,000. Okay. So in this example, we're not going to look at things like down payment and closing costs and so on. We're just going to say this is the amount that we're mortgaging. Okay. We have two options. The bank will either give you a 30-year loan at 4.6%, or if we pay 2 points up front, they'll give us a better percentage rate. They'll give us 4.3%. Okay. The points are rolled into the mortgage, so they're an extra fee, and oftentimes the bank says, we'll also lend you that money too. Okay. It doesn't have to be. If you have the money up front, you could just pay it, but we'll just sort of, to keep things even, to say, I have this much money to pay towards the house. Okay, which option is better for me? So what we're going to do is we're going to first look at this first option and compute everything. Okay, so the first option with no points, compute the monthly mortgage payment. So my principal or present value is $250,000. The interest rate is 4.6%. Okay, it's 30 years and monthly payments. So when I go to my solver thing here, I'm going to do 12 times 30. Interest rate's the same as it was in the last example. We're borrowing $250,000. Okay, final value of 0, payments per year is 12. So now let's solve for a monthly payment, and I get $1,281.61. Okay. Now compute the total of all of my payments for this first financing option. So our total payments is going to be $1,281.61, 12 times a year for 30 years. And we end up with $461,379.60. Okay. And again, that looks kind of reasonable, right? So what we saw in our first example was when you borrow money and we're doing a 30-year mortgage, you end up paying somewhere between the amount that the house actually costs and double, right? It's not quite double, a little less than double. Okay. If you had a really bad interest rate, it could be double or more. Okay, now let's look at the second option with 2 points. So let's first compute the points. It's 2 points, so that's 2% of the amount of money that we're borrowing. So if I'm mortgaging or borrowing the $250,000, I'm paying 2% of $250,000. Okay, so that's $5,000. Now, the example said the points are going to be rolled into the mortgage, right? So what that means is that we're going to borrow the money for our points as well. Okay, so my mortgage amount, right, or the amount of money I'm borrowing is going to be the $250,000 plus the $5,000 in points. So I'm borrowing $255,000. And let's look at the payments on that. Okay. And so our interest rate, they gave us a better rate. They said this is going to be 4.3% instead. Okay. So let's look at this, right? So the N is the same, right? Because it's still 12 times 30. Change this to 4.3%, and we change this to 255,000. Okay. So now my payments are, forgot to change this. I said I changed it, and then I didn't change it. Okay. So now my payments are $1,261.92. So when you want to get it to solve, you don't want to hit enter, right? Because enter is like entering a value. It's that's you telling the calculator. If you want the calculator to tell you, solve is above the enter button. So you hit alpha and then hit enter. Does that work? All right, let me know if it's still giving you trouble, and we'll look at that more closely. Alpha should be in the top left. You should have a button that says second and another button that says alpha. I think they're usually color coded too. So whatever color solve is written in, it should match colors. I don't know if it's always green. So I hit the green alpha and then hit solve. The question is the final value always zero? Yeah, so for a loan, the way that I know that the loan is done is when I owe zero money. So the final value should always be zero because owing zero is the definition of the loan being done. So anytime we're borrowing money, final value is always going to be zero. Or that doesn't stand, it stands for future value, not final value, but you get the idea. Okay. All right, now compute the total of all the payments for 30 years for the second financing option. Oh, good, it worked. All right. So here, the total, we're paying $1,261.92, 12 times a year for 30 years. Okay. So we end up with $454,291.20. Okay. Okay. Now, if I look at these two, one of the things that I want you to notice is that they're different numbers. And if I paid the points over the course of 30 years, I actually end up paying less money. And since we rolled the points into the mortgage, we didn't have to have any extra money up front. Whatever our down payment was, that's what it was. These are just two different mortgage options. So if we paid the points, we actually end up paying $7,000 less at the end of our mortgage. Okay. So if you're buying a house and you're going to live in it for your whole life, then looking at something like paying points might be a good idea because you'll end up paying less money and it doesn't take anything away from you. On the other hand, if you're buying a house and you might move out of it in like 5 or 10 years, paying points is not going to be a good idea, because what happens is we have a lower interest rate with the points, okay, but we have more money that we borrowed up front. So if I look at what happens after 1 day, well, after 1 day with the points option, I owe $5,000 more than with the non-points option. And it takes time for the lower interest rate to sort of benefit you $5,000 worth, okay? So there's a lot of numbers in flux, right? So, you know, I don't want to look at computing it here exactly or say that there's a hard and fast rule. But if you're only going to stay in your house for 5 to 10 years, points are not a good idea. If you're going to stay in your house for 20 or 30 years, points are a good idea, okay? And if it's like dead in the middle, like if it's 15 years, well, maybe it'll break even. Maybe one will come out better than the other. But you'd have to, you know, look at that very carefully to see the difference. Okay. And actually, one of the things that you can do, right, if you're borrowing money from a bank, you can ask them when would these break even and make them compute it for you. You know, it's up to you if you want to trust, but you know, I don't think a banker's going to lie to you, right? You could always ask. Okay, so in this case, if we stayed for the full 30 years, we pay less money with the option where we chose to pay the points. Okay. Well, it's not exactly 7,000. I think if we subtract it, we end up paying $7,088.40 less. Okay. All right. So again, these are things to keep in mind when you're making financial decisions, right? So it's not that one option is always better. Option B is better if you stay there the whole time. If you know you're going to be, you know, sort of in flux, move out in 5 to 10 years, and option A is better. If you're planning on moving in less than 5 years, don't buy a house, rent instead, right? And we didn't have an example for that, but the idea is that all of this money that we pay up front for closing costs and things like that, and when you look at your amortization, those first few payments, you're making a ton in interest payments. And you know, I didn't do that for this example, but let me just show you, like for this one, if we were to say what would be our first month's interest payment, okay? And I'm not going to write it down on the screen because it's not part of the question. But if we borrowed 250, oops, not here. If I borrowed $250,000 and we're paying 4.6%, but monthly. Okay, the first month of interest is $958. So out of the $1,281.61 that I'm making for my mortgage payment, only $323 is actually paying off my balance. Okay, so if you're going to be in your house for like 5 years or less, then it doesn't make sense to buy a house. It makes sense to rent, because your first few years, you're not paying a lot of the house down. So you're not going to own very much of your house when you go to sell it. Okay. All right, let's look at another example. Let's see where we're at. Yeah, we'll get through this example, and then I think we'll be done for the day. That'll finish off our section. Suppose we want to buy a house for $180,000. We have $25,000 saved. The bank will either give us a 30-year loan at 4.6% or a 15-year loan at 4.4%, and there are $4,000 in closing costs. Okay, so here's another thing that happens when you're figuring out when you're borrowing money, and this, you have a similar story with a car. Typically, if you say that you're going to pay it off faster, they will give you a better interest rate. And this actually saves money twice, because I'm borrowing for less time, so interest gets compounded less. And also, I'm getting a better interest rate. Okay, so let's go ahead and compare these two. So for the 30-year option, compute the monthly mortgage payment. So my down payment, I've saved $25,000. I'm going to pay $4,000 in closing costs. So my down payment is $21,000. Okay. So the amount of money that I have to borrow for my house, if the house costs $180,000, I have $21,000 for my down payment. So the amount that I have to finance, right, that's going to be my borrow amount is $180,000 minus $21,000. Okay, so I'm borrowing $159,000. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just use my calculator then. The interest percent is 4.6. Okay. So let's use our finance app to compute the monthly payment. So here we have 12 times 30, 4.6% interest. We're borrowing 159,000. So our monthly payment is $815.10. Okay. That's my answer to part A. Okay, part B, compute the total of all the payments over 30 years for the first financing option. Okay. So the total payments is $815.10, 12 times a year for 30 years. Okay. So I'm going to end up paying $293,436 in total payments. So that's my answer to this part. What I want to do, though, is just to be careful. That's not the same as the total cost, because I walked into this with an extra $25,000, right? We had the closing costs and the down payment. So my total cost is going to be my payments plus the amount of money that I put in on day one, right? Which is, that $25,000 worth, which is the down payment and the fees. So the total cost for the house under this option would be $318,436. Okay. Now let's look at the 15-year option. For the 15-year option, if I want to compute the monthly mortgage payment, I'm still financing the same amount, so I can sort of reuse some of that work from part A. The finance amount is going to be $159,000. Okay, because it's the same down payment, right? Same fees. Okay. But here my interest rate is 4.4%, and the time is only 15 years. Okay. So on my finance app, I want 12 times 15 for my total number of payments. My interest rate goes down a little bit, but the amount I'm borrowing is the same. So let's solve for our payments. And I get $1,208.23. Okay. So if I compute the total payments, I'm going to take my $1,208.23, pay that 12 times a year for 15 years. and we get a total of $217,481.40. Okay. So notice you end up paying a whole lot less, right? It's not a little bit less. That's a lot less. Right, we're saving almost $76,000 here. Okay. So under option B, we save $75,954.60. Okay. So you pay a whole lot less. However, I've got a bigger monthly payment. And if I can afford $815, but I can't afford $1,200, maybe option B isn't an option for me, right? So that's one of the things that you do when you're buying something. This is especially true with a car. They don't ask you how much you want to pay for the car. What they like to do is say, how much can you afford per month? And they say, all right, well, if you're interested in a more expensive car, we can put you in a more expensive car by making the loan longer so you have smaller payments, right? By making the loan take more time, your payments go down, but you end up paying a lot more over time, okay? So it's something to be aware of. The monthly payments are a little bit easier under option A. Let me write down exactly how much. Yeah, so the monthly payments are $393.13 less. Under option A. Okay. So there's a balance, right? If I say, oh, I'm only going to do a 15-year loan because obviously that's better. If I have the same amount of money that I can put towards my monthly payment, I'm not going to be able to get as nice a car or as nice a house. Okay. But in the long run, I'll have saved more money. Right? I'll have paid less for my thing. So again, when I say compare the two options, I'm not saying there's a better option here. I'm saying what we want to do, one of our goals in this class, is to be able to make good financial decisions. And I guess when I say good, I mean informed financial decisions, right? So if you say, oh, okay, I know that this loan option is going to end up making me pay more money, but I need this smaller payment, okay, then you've made an informed decision. Or if you say, no, if I can afford a little bit higher payment, I end up saving a whole lot of money. Okay, now you've made an informed decision. Okay, one last thing. Suppose that taxes on the house are $6,000 a year and insurance is $1,200 a year. What does that make your monthly payment? So what happens is that if I add those up, right, $7,200 per year, and I divide that by 12, I end up with $600 per month. Okay, so what ends up happening is that the bank will say, you're going to actually pay an extra $600 a month, and we'll include that as part of your monthly payment, and that $600 goes to your escrow account. By the way, they don't give you insurance on your escrow account. You always keep money in there, and they don't pay any interest on it. You just, Okay, so if I look at option A, my mortgage payment is, we said it was $815.10 plus the $600 that I have to pay to my escrow account. So I'm actually going to pay $1,415.10. Okay. Under option B, okay, we started with 1208.23, and we have this extra $600. So my actual payment that I have to make to the bank each month is $1,808.23. Okay. So when we're comparing like cost of a house and things like that, we don't typically include things like insurance and taxes because you always pay those on a house. It doesn't matter if you own it or not, they're always there, right? You're never done paying taxes. Okay. That'll exist forever. And insurance is kind of the same way, right? I mean, you don't decide like, oh, now I've paid off my house, I'll stop buying homeowners insurance. I mean, nobody's forcing you to buy homeowners insurance once your house is paid off. It still seems like a good idea, right? I mean, if your house burns down and you don't have insurance, then you just don't have a house anymore. You just have a bill for cleaning it up, right? Okay. All right. I think that's good for notes for this section. I'll get these posted up today, and also the notes from yesterday. I'll get that posted up and some homework posted up. So we should have plenty to look at